So here's what we got. The neocons win. More war abroad and, bomb the world and invite the world.
So recently, Dave Smith was on the Breaking Points podcast talking about Israel's recent strike on Iran, talking about how this represents a serious victory for the neocons, as sick as that is. I've agreed with that statement, by the way. I think this is the biggest triumph of the neocons since probably the coup in Libya or the coup in Ukraine in 2014. But I do say that reluctantly. It's sad, but I want to hear what Dave has to say. So let's watch, let's react, like the video, and subscribe to the channel.
You know, what's even crazier to me, Dave, is just like the lead up to the war in Iraq, we already have our Ahmed Talibi. I actually can't believe it, or our 1953 Operation Ajax. Let's go and put B4, please, up on the screen. We actually have members of the Israeli government who are tweeting out pictures of the son of the Shah of Iran, basically insinuating that they are going to re-implement the monarchy on the people of Iran. It's like 1953 all over again, or just like this, fascination with these Western figures who have lived here, for their entire lives almost at this point. We're like, oh, actually, these guys, because we're buddies and they agree with us, the people of Iran will totally take to that, and we're going to implement this new regime. They're not even being subtle about it. Like I said, these are literally members of the Israeli government who are teasing basically the restoration of the monarchy in Iran by force. It's like 2003 all over again, where we
as if 1953 didn't go, a little bit worse than was expected. It's just absurd what these people celebrate.
We have this buddy here, like you said, with the neocons in Washington, and then this theory that we can just go in, blow out the regime, and then we're going to implement this new style of government. I mean, this is as naked as it gets, in my opinion, on all of this. And I want you to just, go through, perhaps because you're so well read on the history of these, these attempts by the United States and others to install these types of figures. And it never, ever works out. When will we ever back the right horse in the Middle East?
Yeah. And of course, look, installing the Shah to begin with in 1953 is a huge part of the reason why we have the current government in Iran that we have, which is a horrible, repressive government that does not give their people liberty, and we should all, oppose that. But the thing is that war is so much worse. It's like Saddam Hussein was a brutal, oppressive dictator also, but the worst thing that ever happened to the people of Iraq was George W. Bush invading the country. And, the only examples that people look to, which are, rather remarkable examples of regime change, are Germany and Japan, and how they were brought back into the, liberal international order after World War II. But what was required in order to get to that point was a clear war on the civilian population with, millions of casualties. And that, like, if your argument is we should bring that to Iran, then don't tell me one word about how you care about how the people of Iran are being oppressed, because that's a far worse, level of oppression. And so, this is, again, as you guys have touched on, this is always how they talk at the beginning of these wars. It's always that democracy will sweep the region and that the people will greet us as liberators. It'll be easy.
Yeah, I lived through this in my prime. 2003, this was the word on the street from the neocons. We'll be greeted as liberators. We're going to bring democracy to Iraq. Everything will be roses. There'll be a path to glory, acceptance from the international community, no more despotism. People will vote. Women will have rights. All of it. Propaganda, total propaganda to support the war. You're seeing that right now with Iran. People don't learn from the past many times, I hate to say, because our foreign policy has followed that same line again. We had those banners, mission accomplished, on that aircraft carrier that George Bush was on. But then it followed by about 20 additional years of disastrous occupation in Iraq, where 1 million Iraqis died. It depleted the federal treasury, and they ended up with fundamentalists ruling the country anyways. That is likely what's going to pan out in Iran, just as it did after the U.S. installed the Shah in 1953 with the help of the British as part of Operation Ajax.
paid for in oil, all this stuff. But sit here and tell me about how Washington D.C. or Tel Aviv can reorchestrate another society, can reconstruct it from the ground and choose its leaderships. I mean, just think about the hubris involved in that. As the late great Harry Brown used to point out when he was talking about the war on drugs in the United States of America, the U.S. federal government can't even keep drugs out of federal prisons. Yeah. Washington D.C. can't even solve the violent crime problem in Washington D.C. But you're telling me we're going to install the new leader for the Iranians and the people will comply because what? Because the regime is so weak and the people want liberty so much? This regime has ruled since 1979 with the most powerful governments in the world opposing them, working on ousting them the entire time. And they've still stayed in power. So you could tell me a nice story. It's easy to write down a nice story. Oh yeah, I say we intervene and then we put the Shah's son back in and then everything works out fine. Okay, let's see that happen. And the other thing that I'll add, and I don't know, I mean, maybe things have changed to some degree. I mean, certainly Israel was able to pull off that drone attack, which I don't think they would have been able to pull off in years past. But it was in 2007 that the Pentagon told George W. Bush that we cannot go to war with Iran because we do not have escalation dominance against them.
Yeah, this is something a lot of people forget is actually toward the end of George W. Bush's administration, the idea of overthrowing Iran was actually floated. And this was after all the disasters that had happened in the Middle East under the Afghanistan campaign and the Iraq occupation, when even Dick Cheney was trying to promote this idea. Dick Cheney was trying to push the president into overthrowing Iran. And even George W. Bush rebuffed him and said no. I mean, to my chagrin, Bush tried to kind of cover that up by saber rattling with another power, Russia, in the Bucharest summit, saying, hey, Georgia and Ukraine are going to be part of NATO. Imagine that. And that was disastrous too. But he stopped short of trying to overthrow Iran because it was so unpopular. His approval ratings were in the tank and the markets crashed that year too. So people don't remember this, but they've been trying to do this the whole time. They also tried to do it in the 80s when the U.S. supported Iraq. Iraq invaded Iran in the Iraq-Iran war. That went on for some years, and then Saddam became the enemy of the U.S. anyways. That's often what happens to the so-called allies that the U.S. arms. That happened to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, by the way, too.
Essentially meaning that they can hit all of our bases and embassies in the region, and we are very vulnerable to them. And we've already seen demonstrated since the Israeli attack that the Iranian the missiles that they sent last year toward Israel, as many of us guessed, that wasn't really their best. They were intentionally making an attack that wouldn't really hurt anybody, that wouldn't really lead to a war, which Iran has done over and over again. But now we've pushed them to the point where they probably don't feel that they have the option not to respond. And Donald Trump telling them to come back to the negotiating table now is a joke. Yeah. I mean, what a impotent leader to be sitting there talking about coming back to the negotiating table. It's like sitting after Pearl Harbor and telling FDR, now's the time to go negotiate with the Japanese. Right.
Yeah, this is the best point. It's just strikingly stupid to think that this is some part of grand strategy still to secure a diplomatic arrangement with Iran. That is gone. That is out the window because of how the U.S. handles things, how the military-industrial complex pushes it to do so, how the Zionist and Israel lobby pushes U.S. politics and foreign policy into a direction that they desire. Dave's absolutely right now. The worst part of this thing, perhaps, is that Iran can touch lots of U.S. troops in the region. Best solution is to pull them out, by the way, but if you don't pull them out, they could hit them. And that it just sabotages U.S. efforts to secure peace in Ukraine. Is Putin going to think that Trump's a trustworthy partner in terms of negotiating that? I think not, especially as he's bankrolling Ukraine just as Trump is bankrolling Israel.
Negotiations are over now. The time for negotiations was before this. And so, yeah, Donald Trump looks, and man, I supported him this last year. I apologize for doing so. It was a bad calculation. At the time, it seemed like the right one. But he should be impeached and removed for this one. Wow. And not on some not on some ridiculous Nancy Pelosi. Of course, the Congress will never do it because they're all a bunch of corrupt hacks.
This is the one thing they support. This is like the
Yeah, this is the one thing that Democrats always support if Trump does it. Trump is to be condemned for everything, including saying like the sky is blue or water is healthy for you. But if he gets into a war, he gets a pass. And you're seeing a lot of silence on that. You're seeing a lot of other vitriol toward Trump for things much lesser in degree of devastation than that. But the whole uniparty is aligned on these wars, on Ukraine and Iran in particular. So you won't hear condemnations, by and large, from members of Congress, typically adversarial to Trump, on this issue. That's for sure.
Donald Trump should be impeached and removed for this. All of his supporters should turn on him. It's the absolute betrayal of everything that he ran and campaigned on and everything that he stood for. And I will say, despite the fact that, Donald Trump supporters have been labeled like a cult following, and that certainly is true for a percentage of his supporters, he is going to lose his coalition over this. I don't just speak for myself when I say there are a lot of us who simply will not go along with this. So,
yeah, that's true. What makes you think Trump can pursue a lot of his other agenda if half of his base is literally split on this issue, which it truly seems like a large percentage is? Do you think that he has the political capital now to secure the border or enact mass deportations or pass protective tariffs? I don't think he's going to get those things through, regardless of how you feel on those things. I don't think Trump's going to get that done. This is going to rip his base apart, and it really looks to be an Israel first policy, an Israel first mentality within a campaign that promised to be America first. That's what we're seeing. I think Dave is right about the political calculations behind this will prove to be disastrous. We're already seeing a major schism on this from his supporters.
It's just a devastating mistake. By the way, on top of that, he's also going to lose the deportation fight because of this. Because right now he needed all the political capital he could have to turn that, you got a majority support for deportations, but the minority is very mobilized and they're out and they're protesting all around the country. He needed all of his political capital for that move. So here's what we got. The neocons win. More war abroad and, bomb the world and invite the world. No matter who you vote for, you always get John McCain.
It is funny, some of the smartest evangelicals I know say that the war in Iraq is actually what killed them. And they're like, we were winning, we were on top in 04, we were, with Defensive Marriage Act and all of this. But it was Bush, actually, who killed our agenda and any ability, to do that. And then we lost, obviously, the 2008 election. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with it, but people who, if you do care about some of the domestic stuff, let's say, that Donald Trump did run on, well, you got your answer as to the easiest way to destroy it. Go ahead.
That's right. I mean, the political capital disintegration argument can't be ignored here. And I do think you're going to see a decline in his ratings, no matter how he tries to sell this, no matter how much his hardcore supporters say, no, he really was trying to negotiate and this is a grand 4D chess maneuver. No matter how much that's true, you're already seeing a rift. It impacts other areas of politics, as we've seen before. It impacted George W. Bush in 2003, 2004, thereafter, because of this, and it's undeniable.
Well, look through all of American history, right? This is why it's so crazy for conservatives to not be anti-war. When did they lose the culture, the big time? When did they have the hippie sexual revolution? It was during the Vietnam War. Yeah. And when did we see the rise in wokeism and progressive control of all these institutions? You think it was a coincidence that it was the administration after George W. Bush? When you launch an immoral war of aggression, you lose the moral high ground, period. Yeah. So you can't lecture your society anymore. Well, you hear some of these right-wing war hawks are going to lecture us about being pro-life, about abortion being murder. Get out of here. And this is why the evangelicals lost their seat at the table for a generation, because they went all in on murdering 1 million people in Iraq for no reason. And so, it was John Quincy Adams who said, if we go around the world looking for monsters to destroy, we will become the dictatress of the world, but we will lose our own soul.
Well said. One of our best presidents.
Yeah, he was absolutely right about that. I'm actually not a fan of John Quincy Adams in general. He wanted to revive Henry Clay's America system, impose protective tariffs, huge infrastructure bills, both of which were unconstitutional at the time. Certainly so. There were good arguments for that. James Madison spent one of his last acts in office vetoing a bill that would have had a similar infrastructure plan to the one John Quincy Adams supported, but nonetheless, he was so right on this one. And John Quincy Adams was likely the best Secretary of State in U.S. history, or maybe at least in that conversation, because not only did he establish the Monroe Doctrine that the U.S. wouldn't get involved in overseas military conflicts in Europe over European affairs, but also he helped secure the acquisition of Florida after, through insubordination, Andrew Jackson invaded under Monroe's presidency. And, John Quincy Adams used his foreign influence and acumen to say, hey, the rate at which he conquered that territory seems to suggest you should sell this to us, Spain. And they did. So John Quincy Adams is right on target there.
Absolutely.
Well, Dave, you may feel that way, but Bill Ackman feels very different. I mean, this is an important point to put B7 up on the screen, which is that I think you're right. There was a part of his coalition, including yourself and others, who thought Trump would be more of a peace candidate and more anti-war than Kamala Harris as the alternative. But there was another part of the coalition that looks like this, that is all, thinks that we have not gone nearly far enough in terms of fighting a direct hot regime change war against Iran. And so you've got Bill Ackman here saying the parade was great, our military is incredible. Now Israel needs our help to destroy Iran's nuclear threat to the world. They say that, he says, Israel's military and air force have sufficiently degraded Iran's defenses such that this is now the lowest risk, highest probability moment to take out Iran's nuclear capability, grave threat to us all. We should not let this great opportunity, Dave, pass us by. But Israel does not have the equipment and armaments to complete the job. We do. And it does not require boots on the ground. The war Israel has been fighting has been on behalf of all of us. Let's help them finish the job.
Yep.
This is a powerful voice in the Republican coalition.
And it just seems so absurd for so many of the pro-Trump supporters that cheered on the ascension of Tulsi Gabbard to be director of national intelligence to essentially contravene what she said about Iran and how there's no evidence they've restarted their nuclear weapons program at all, but still go through with that tried and true neocon propaganda that, they're weeks away from acquiring a nuclear weapon. We have to finish the job there. Enact regime change, side with Netanyahu, the hero of us all. It's just sickening, and it doesn't make any sense. But that's what you get. This coalition was, a combination of old school right-wingers, paleo-conservatives that aren't interventionists, some Ron Paul-oriented non-interventionists, and neocons. Some neocons supported Trump. Some still do. Others, like Bill Kristol, essentially threw all their support behind Biden, but really, U.S. foreign policy is indistinguishable in many regards between administrations.
It's a powerful voice within the administration. It's a powerful voice, nationally in terms of achieving the policy ends and goals that they want.
It's like we're never going to get the mass deportations, but could we at least deport all of these war hawks to an El Salvadorian prison? Like, could we just? They really just should not. I mean, I don't know. It's testing
that's the Israel horseshoe between you and me, Dave.
Right.
Well,
Yeah, and Ron Paul was right about this a few weeks ago, and he's so good on the issue still, even though he's getting older, harder for him to communicate now. But he was so right when he said that I don't believe in a draft, but if there was a draft, we should draft all the neocons to fight in these wars. And yeah, it's hard to disagree with them over how evil their decisions are in getting us into this stuff.
It's testing my belief in libertarianism, because when I hear this stuff, it's like these people do not have a right to speak. You shouldn't have a right to open your mouth. The nerve, it's like they could just say these things that are so objectively untrue. Like, look, if you want to say, hey, look, I think this war in Iran isn't going to be a disaster like all the other ones were, and I think we're finally right, even though we've been wrong 9 times in a row, I think we're right about this one. Like, fine, make your argument. But to say this is the lowest risk, like that this is by far the highest risk of any of the terror wars, objectively. That's not like an opinion. That's just, it might end up working out, but the downside is the riskiest by far. That is, any military expert would back that up, who's not lying through their teeth would back that up. So anybody sit down and argue with me about potentially what Saddam Hussein could have done to us after we invaded, or potentially what Gaddafi could have done to us versus what the mullahs can do to us. I'm sorry. The risk is at the highest here. I hope that doesn't come true. I recognize we're already at war with this country. I know it won't look good for me, but I hope it does go well. I hope it's not the disaster that it looks like it's going to be. But don't sit here and tell me that this is the least risky one. This is by far the riskiest of all the terror wars. You know, maybe the a proxy war with Russia was riskier than this. But compared to Libya or Syria or Somalia or Afghanistan or Iraq, no comparison.
Yeah, I have to agree with them there, especially because Iran has so much more advanced weaponry compared to those other states, Libya and Iraq at the time, and Yemen, certainly. They have ballistic missiles, and they have cruise missiles, they have drones. They have a lot more advanced capabilities compared to many of the other countries. But look, I don't think this time it's going to be different. I know the neocons are out there celebrating, saying how great this is, how, reason won the day. It's just so ridiculous. I tend to think that this is going to go the way the other 9 out of 10 went, like Dave said. It's going to be 10 out of 10. This is going to be a disastrous, prolonged war. Our friends in the military industrial complex are going to try to convince us this is going to be easy, but they want this stretched out in a prolonged way to be a money laundering scheme, much like Afghanistan was, much like Ukraine is now, a prolonged affair where it's not even successful. It's not designed to be successful. It's designed to be lucrative for them. And if it does succeed, if there is a regime change operation there, I hope no U.S. troops are touched in the process of that. That might be a pipe dream at this point because there's so many U.S. military bases around Iran, because the U.S. empire has tried to build around the Middle East to an extent that is just mind-boggling and hasn't proven to be effective or efficient or desirable by the average American. And I also hope that it doesn't detract too much from the negotiating power that Trump, whatever semblance he still has in negotiating a peace in Ukraine. But that's my biggest fear, outside of how this could kill many U.S. servicemen, is that this is going to just totally sabotage prospects of peace in Ukraine. Now, Trump still has the quote-unquote Trump card when it comes to Ukraine, because he can just withdraw support from Ukraine. That would end the war. It would get the Europeans more involved. It would force Zelensky to sign a peace. It won't be as good of a peace as he could have signed in Istanbul, but it would happen either way. But look, the U.S. is sucked into this war. Trump can pretend this is only an Israeli operation, but he was in on it. All the evidence points to that he was in on it. He was even covering up for it, at least in that last week. And he's still providing arms, equipment, and intelligence to Israel, interceptor missiles, and he's boasting about how successful this operation was. Well, that's America last. This is not the Trump so many dissidents voted for. I didn't. I'm happy to say that. I never supported him, but I could understand at some point the case to have done that, thinking that he actually would be better on foreign policy than he has. Well, many people were snookered by him, and I think this is the latest example. So say what you want. I've said my word, but I want to hear from you in the comments below. How culpable do you think Trump is in this whole ordeal? Do you think that there's any off-ramp for the U.S. from this? Or is just the U.S. wrapped up in this war against Iran permanently? I want to hear from you on that. Let me know below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Consider supporting the channel by becoming a YouTube member or a Patreon patron. I'd really appreciate that. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.